early light, what so proudly we hailed at the twilight's last gleaming, whose broad stripes and bright stars through the perilous fight and the ramparts we watched were so gallantly streaming, and the rocket's red glare, the bombs bursting in air, gave proof through the night that our flag was still there. Oh, say does that star-spangled banner yet wave o'er the land of the free and the home of the brave?
All right. Good morning. Good morning. Good Monday morning. Streaming live on Rumble X and YouTube on this Monday, September 15th, September 22nd, September 22nd, 2025. I'm just trying to make sure we have sound again today because I think we sorted through this weekend. I gutted a lot of stuff and kind of came from scratch. And so anyway, so hopefully this is solid now. And what's funny is I still can't hear this clip. So this morning when I was hearing the countdown, I can't hear the countdown, and I can't hear her singing the national anthem unless I turn it on in another place. But we're going to live with this. These are small problems, I think. Hopefully we're good to go today. All right. So on Mondays, I like to build our thinking around currency and currency markets and the implications on currency movements. What does it mean for us? All right. And I saw in the chat this morning, Zero Woke Point said, looks like crypto took a dive last night. What will today hold? We're going to take a look at that. Good morning, Trumpet. Good morning, Crash and Splash. And we'll take a look at that. We're going to look at Ethereum. We're going to look at Bitcoin. And I'm doing a show tonight with Aaron Day. It's at 6 o'clock. I think it starts East Coast time. And he runs long. So there's a good chance it'll go, a good 4 hours or something like that. But it's on the illusion, right, of free speech. And how does that factor into currency? Well, again, you've got currency bound by borders. And if we're going to break down these borders and we're going to go to like some sort of a digital, a digital currency, it's going to be around the world, that's going to go across borders. And this is coming, and we don't really know what that means. That changes a lot of things, right? Freedom of speech. And I think there's a connection here, right? And that's what we're going to try to, I'm going to come at it from the angle. Aaron's got a lot of stuff. He sent me his outline yesterday, and it's stacked with stuff. I mean, so again, I want to promote that to anybody who cares because I think it will be long, right? I just want to give you the heads up on that. It will be long. Aaron, he's the king of long form, right? I mean, it's like, I don't know if I've seen him do many videos that aren't 4 hours, many streams. So, but it will be loaded with content in terms of the free speech. And I want to interject a couple things. We're going to talk about them today in here, this TikTok deal. And that's a big thing. And the involvement now of the Murdoch family, and they're going to get a stake in this. And again, remember, I'll just say it out of the gate. I mean, this is the key takeaway of the show is that, whoever controls the algorithm really controls what you're going to hear and basically the news flow. And we've seen this through the years with the news wires, right? I watch the news wires, and, they're a necessary evil. I wish I didn't have to because I'd rather just trade, on the things that I have and the algorithms and, the harmonics and these different tools that I've built, because I was talking to someone about this yesterday, the harmonic structure is great unto itself. because, it really does give you guidance in terms of, okay, what is your target? How do you manage the risk through that whole process? Because if you just buy something and you hold, how do you know when to get out? If you buy something and it goes sideways for a long time, how long do you know how to hold it? The harmonics takes those two big things away out of the equation, right? You know what your target is, okay, and you get checkpoints along the way, and you can manage the risk. Like if you don't get it right out of the gate, no big deal. You just wait for a pullback to a level, okay? But what level, right? So then so you get a higher quality of question, right? That's really what we deal with in life, is we go from a question to hopefully a higher quality question to a higher quality question. So when you get into the higher quality question, the next thing is, okay, well, why will it hold at the 5/8? Will it hold at the 3/8 on a pullback, right? So it gets to the 6/8, right? Market's moving, kind of like we saw in the stock market, over the last couple months. Gets to the 5/8, pulls back, trades at the halfway, goes to the 7/8, comes back to the halfway. So how do you know that it's going to hold at the 5/8 and not the 4/8? Okay, well, you don't, right? But all you can do is find low risk. So again, all we're going to do is you take a big picture view, then you take a smaller picture view, then you take a smaller picture view, and you just keep, focusing in on that short time frame as short as you possibly can without losing perspective, right? So you want to dial in as much as you can without losing perspective. And then you can say, okay, I don't know what's going to happen next, but if this 5/8 is going to hold, this looks like a good spot. Maybe it doesn't work. You say it again, you get another setup. Okay, if it's going to hold, this looks like a good spot again. So that's what you're trying to do, right? Is just take a big picture view, dial it in to a microscopic view. And that's how I approach things, right? And so, we're gonna unload a bunch of new harmonics over the last. We've really been. I didn't want to muddy the waters, especially especially just coming back. A little over a week ago, and then I think what is our second week back or third week? 1, 2, 3. I guess our third week back. Wednesday till next. Anyway, so it's going on our third week back, but basically 1 week of little over a week of content. And so I didn't want to dump a bunch of new harmonics on here. I just finish up the old stuff, right? Well, what are the key things we're watching, right? Right now, we watch the stocks. Okay, they hit the full upside objective. 65.74 in the S&P, 21.465 in the Nasdaq, whatever that number is. And then we've got this crude oil thing we're watching, 63.18. And that other what I kind of think is a polluted harmonic structure. Just because of what happened in Iran and some other things, right? The way that harmonic structure came about is it just doesn't feel right to me, okay? But again, it is what it is. It might work great, but right now, again, we don't have to worry about it too much because we're looking at the 63.18. We've got that old harmonic structure in the natural gas, right? We talked about that last week. We have this harmonic structure in the silver that worked really well up to that 37, 39.73, I think it was. And so we'll take a look. Hopefully we'll take a look at silver today. Silver's ripping, right? Silver's ripping. Gold's up too, but silver was really ripping. It's almost hit that target we talked about, that 40. It's in that 43 to 45 range. So it's in that zone. So there's a good chance it's going to go sideways here for a little while, kind of reestablish itself, build some energy. So again, it wasn't a great idea, I didn't think, to just start dumping a bunch of new harmonic structures. It's kind of finish these things up. The stock market, again, we're watching these levels, but it's holding above them, and we talked about the contract roll, the September to December, and how we probably could have pulled more out of that, but I didn't, right? I can't say I should have pulled more out of that and presented more. Then I can put it on right? We then can ask the questions, but so again, that was probably, I should have pulled more out of that and been looking ahead at the December contract and watching it hit. It's just, it's a lot of things, but it is on my. I've always reminded myself. I've always tried to remind myself, Craig, you need to look ahead to the forward contract. You need to look at the upcoming contract, and I do it a lot. I just don't do it all the time, and so I'm trying to make a new, add to my checklist of things that always check that. And so, making progress on all fronts here. You guys, me, no matter how much you do, there's always something else you can do, to be better. And I guess that's the thing. Okay. So that's kind of the thing. Check that thing out tonight with Aaron Day, talking about the illusion of freedom of speech. And I'm going to bring in, the what happened at Rumble and what happened with LFA, as a testimonial. And some other things that I've heard, again, from trusted sources that are in that space that again confirm that it's an illusion, right? We have an illusion of freedom of speech right now. And I think what's going on at TikTok is a big deal. And all we can do is put it out there, look at what's going on, make our predictions of what this is leading to. I think the technocracy, right? I think it's moving full steam ahead. And especially when you bring in the Murdochs, like that's just red flag material to me. Because why? Because you need to distribute this stuff, right? You need to, once you change the algorithm, you need to distribute across key platforms. And I think, and again, and this is one thing I wanted to say, okay, that, you know, as we reflect back, okay, on the memorial of Charlie Kirk, you know, unbelievable sight to be seen. People stacked up outside, people stacked up inside, packed house, you know, people around the world paying attention to this. You know, it's a big deal, right? This is a big deal. And here's the other thing, okay? So if there's something, how do I put this? We can wade through all the details. You know, were there multiple shooters? You know, could a shooter have moved from this rooftop to that rooftop? Why would they do that? You know, the whole thing with Israel, you know, calling out Netanyahu and to stand down with Hamas, which we've talked about endlessly in here, you know, really since the end of 2023, you know, with that 79.37 level in crude oil, saying something's not right here. You know, like if that was a legitimate event and you really thought there was going to be like an unfolding, an unraveling of an attack on Israel, crude oil would have spiked through the roof. The markets knew already back then that was a scam, right? That Israel stood down against Hamas. Charlie Kirk called that out with Patrick Bet-David, where he asked the question and he said, you know, it's the size of New Jersey, and I've taken a helicopter across, you know, the whole space of Israel, and it takes 45 minutes. They stood down for 6 hours. You know, why can't we ask that question, right? You know, so again, was that why he got whacked? Is it just some deranged kid, you know, in a deranged world of transgenderism? And, you know, and is it that? I don't think it's that simple, right? But here's the thing. We can wade through all those details, and people are going to do that all day long, and they're going to do it all week. They've been doing it for 11 days, right? That's all they're going to do. And you're going to bring in this guy. Do I trust Kyle Seraphin? Do I trust these guys? Do I trust this analysis? Who has the analysis? In the end, we may never know. We don't know anything about Trump. You know, we don't know anything about those shootings, even though I still think there's one reason that I think that's a very suspicious event. And that's because of a guy named Vincent Fusca who's standing right behind President Trump. He doesn't flinch when the shot goes off. He goes to texting on his phone. And the reason that that's such a big deal is because for those of you who followed, you know, have any inclination about this Q movement, you know that he's like a factor in there, right? His name comes up. Irregardless of that, I remember seeing him after the 2020 elections on Lou Dobbs' show behind a fence. And he's in there with his little cat hat on, you know, and it's very clear they want him to be seen on the other side of the fence where the votes are being counted. In a country of 350 million people, the fact that Vincent Fusca is standing directly behind President Trump when he gets shot, and that he's on Lou Dobbs behind that fence in Philadelphia where they're counting the votes, is just, it's again, you could say, well, how are those two events connected? Well, obviously, this guy gets carte blanche treatment into all Trump events, but it's just a red flag to me, right? That he was behind President Trump on that day, and I don't know what to take from it. Okay, I don't know if I want to say that it was rigged. I don't know what I want to say. I just say that that's one of those barbs that sticks up for me. So again, in the Charlie Kirk thing, we'll see if anything surfaces like that. You know, there's always people looking. There's how many thousands of hours, you know, everybody's got a cell phone. How many cell phones? It could be somebody's cell phone pops up in 2 or 3 weeks and all of a sudden there's a video. And then you got to ask yourself, is it real? Is it a deep fake? Is it AI driven? Is it generated? Is someone modifying it? I mean, the world will probably never know, but here's what we will know is if we see events occurring in the future, right, that make sense that you're like, okay, that was a necessary thing to happen for this and this and this to happen. Then all of a sudden you can start to say, okay, I think this was more than just some transgender dude, you know, or dude with a transgender, you know, roommate, you know, and that whole thing. More than just a disgruntled kid, okay, that, you know, went rogue potentially. And that's how I'm going to know, right, is watching the events unfold forward, because that's how these guys work, right? They've got our attention. If they wanted our attention, they've got our attention. And so that's that, right? So that's my thing on the Charlie Kirk. Again, you know, very touching moments with, you know, his wife and, you know, President Trump. And I'm going to leave it at that. I don't want to start hitting other people because, you know, again, memorial to, you know, bless the kids, right? Pray for the kids. It's a sad thing for those kids to never have a father, even though he was a great father. Everything showed that. So I'm going to leave it at that. If there's something much bigger going on with this assassination, right? We're going to see over time. Well, again, this is where it pays to have a memory and not get brainwashed by TikTok and these other things. Sometimes it's good to, have your sources, question them, put things together yourself, and then, make your own determinations. That's the thing, right? Make your own mind up, instead of just getting, that's what I try to do, right? That's the only thing I can say is, when watching markets, the reason I can say this is that I watch things unfold. Like I'll watch an event, I'll watch a newswire come through, and then I watch the unfolding of it, that comes after that. And then I say, I think that's a scam. I'm pretty sure. I'm like 90% sure that what they're saying right there is a scam. But then it's like in the days to come is when it really unfolds, and I'm like, "Yep, that was a scam." I'm sure of it now because I can see what people are saying on the back of that. So anyway, so just keep that in mind. Hopefully that's helpful. Maybe you already do all this stuff. It's just trying to bring these things that I see in the markets. Okay, all right, and all right. So again, all right. Welcome to fall. Right, end of summer. Beginning of fall, one of the things that happens that people probably don't think about when this happens is the UN General Assembly meets, okay? And again, this is 193 member country, state, UN window of time that happens September to December, okay? And they basically come together on supposedly voting on international issues, and then they give their recommendations, and they vote on things that we never really even hear about. Okay, it's a lot of things that go on. You wonder, like, okay, if you're ever in New York, you'll see these. You'll see what's the right word? The cars, right? All the cars and the escorts and the police, and you'll see them coming through, and all these, UN people that have diplomatic immunity. And, and it's this big thing, and it's nonstop, right? Just coming through, when these events are going on. And you can tell, like, okay, it's in session, and, it blocks all the roads, they clear out the roads, right, and so forth. Anyway, the point here is that I think this one is going to be interesting to watch because there's a lot of things going on internationally with the tariffs. We see the things going on. We're going to talk about this H-1B visa a little bit today, just briefly, just because we want to sort through. Some people are going to sort through this one, but I think we can hit this one pretty hard and figure out what's really going on with it. But you'll see that. We see the things going on with Israel again, a little bit back to that. Australia, Canada, and the UK have now formally recognized a Palestinian state, just in time for this UN General Assembly meeting this week. And all three countries are making a coordinated push for the two-state solution, right? And in this ongoing and never-ending saga and catastrophe, right, Trump and Netanyahu say that this rewards Hamas, okay, and it threatens Israel's security, which, again, this goes back to that whole stand down, right? I mean, this is what Charlie Kirk may have gotten blown away for, right, is calling this out. And so here we are at the UN General Assembly, right, and look, there's so many things to question, do you really want to side with Australia, Canada, and UK? Do you really want to side with President Trump and Netanyahu on this? I mean, there's almost no good side no one good to side with on this, I mean, it's like you get bad and you get worse and you get worser. I mean, I'm not sure which one's worse, because if you're really trying to sort out the truth, it's a mess. And so the point is, I think that this UN General Assembly meeting, this session, okay, that runs from September to December, may get more play than possibly ever before. And I want to pay attention to this, even though it's stuff that's not fun. And, every day you got to do a search on this. What's going on at the UN General Assembly, right? And then you look at it and you go through it and you're like, okay, garbage, 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 garbage. Oh, that's interesting, right? What does that mean? So again, it's like it's 80% garbage, right? And maybe, 15% questionable and 5% value, but it's almost like one of those things because, again, back to if we're going to tear down these territories of currency and freedom of speech and these laws and so forth, a lot of this can happen at these UN General Assembly meetings, and you can see what's coming. Okay, so again, this goes into the research I'm trying to do on this technocracy front and trying to add value to this roundtable and to Aaron Day and to the work he's doing. Okay, All right, with that, let's jump over here and take a look at the. Let me see if there's any questions in here. Good morning, TZ Burton. Good morning. It's convenient to have the public distracted by the tranny stuff. Yep, I think you're right, Trumpet. That's the way I feel too. On Rumble, the Aaron Day Show. Yep, it's on Rumble. You can get it on X. And he thinks he's being shadow banned already because this Curtis Yarvin. He might go into that. I think he'll go into that tonight. How he feels like there's he's been shadow banned before. In like 2020, he got whacked. He had, I forget, huge amount of viewers on certain topics and got whacked. And then he kind of went away for a while and just did his thing, and then kind of came back in the last year, couple years. I think he did a lot of touring and stuff like that, trying to teach people how to get privacy with currency, with crypto, with digital currency, right? And so he spent a lot of time doing that, and I don't know what he thought was going to come of that. I don't know if he was learning. He was also writing a book at the time. This guy's super sharp, and I think he definitely has his finger on the pulse of a lot of things, and I think he's worth listening to. So, yeah. All right, so let's go ahead and take a look at this. Make sure I can get to this stuff. Let's see if this thing works. Okay, it does work, but that's a mess. All right, let me get this going here so we can get our headlines, get through some of our economic data. Okay, and then let me clear this stuff off there. I should be able to do that. All right. Okay. Looks good to you. I got some problems on my side. I'm like, what? What just happened there? Okay. All right. No big deal. All right. Okay. Oh my gosh. All right. So today we get a massive amount of FOMC speakers, right? Federal Reserve stuff. Again, I think we have 5 or 6 of them. And then this week, we're also going to get Chairman Powell speaking on tomorrow, actually. So again, a lot of Fed speakers today. Get the Bank of England, Governor Bailey speaks. So again, a lot of Fed speak. This is on the back of all those meetings last week, those central bank meetings. This week, we get one central bank meeting of significance, and that's Swiss National Bank. So again, on my radar, I'm watching this Swiss franc, okay, very closely. It hasn't played out like, it hasn't really... It's in a range, right? It's in a big range, right? But it hasn't really broken out. It hasn't played out like I keep thinking it will. But again, this energy has been building for 6-7 years. So, who's to say what month this is going to happen, But this is a huge, maybe the biggest energy build I've ever seen. So does it just diffuse and nothing happens, or does this amount to something significant? And if you look at the trend, since the 1970s, it's been down the US dollar to the Swiss franc. This is one of the big things that I'm watching to see, can this turn around and can the dollar actually rally against the Swiss franc? And that is what would bring in, again, there's so many things in flux right now. Like, we're going to get a new form of currency, right? The dollar, I think, will go away in time. It's not easy to make it go away. It's not as easy as they make it sound, where it's like, oh, we'll just set up bricks, or we'll do this, or we'll do that, and then we'll just set up a new currency, and But this is what's going on behind the scenes, is that I think they're setting, and they need an event, right? They're going to need an event to roll this out, kind of like COVID. It's like, okay, let's roll this COVID thing out, see what we can do, see how many people are malleable, how many people we can bend right into wherever we want, and then let's see what this is going to take to roll out a new currency. I don't know what they were up to with that, but it was definitely a test. It was probably more than a test, but it was, boy, we could go into that one. People do that all day long. People have been doing that for 5 years. I just think that it's a similar situation to that, where they need a big event if they're going to roll out, the social credit score, the digital currency, a real change in how we transact. Okay. And this is why privacy matters so much, right? This is why privacy is going to become such a big point. And if you guys have questions on that, go ahead and ask them, because I'm happy to answer them. I don't want to overdo it, because we're going to do that in other places. So I don't want to overdo it in here, and I can't do it justice in here anyway. So I'm going to just defer to other locations like this tech roundtable and, this thing with Aaron tonight. If you want to get in on that and figure out because I do think there's a lot of opportunity there, but there's opportunity in terms of, you could get in at Zano at $15 or $13 or $10 if it pulls back. And this thing is better than Monero, which is trading at like $300. So, you're already looking at, a product that's better than Monero, okay, that, could, and you just don't know how things are going to unfold. I mean, privacy could matter a lot. And the Zano has a potential, one, for price appreciation, but also just privacy, So there's multiple factors. There's a lot of different things going on with this stuff. Again, tokenization. I mean, there's so many little things going on that they're just huge points to tackle all on their own. Okay, so keeping rolling with this week, we have the Fed meeting this week, and we had the Fed meeting last week. We have the Swiss National Bank meeting this week, and there were a couple points I wanted to make on this, and I'll come back to that. But so right now where we stand with this is there's a 92% chance of a rate cut, another 25 basis points in October. And then there's probably another, it's not quite 92%, but there's another really good chance of another one in December. And then who knows what 2026 brings, okay? So, but right now there's a lot of Fed speak. We've got Stephen Moran in the mix, okay? He's the one that they just added last week, in a shotgun session, right, through the Senate to get him approved to be on the FOMC board. He voted, he dissented, right? We talked about that stuff last week. Okay, but there's going to be a lot of that this week coming through. Lots of Fed speak. All right. Then we have, then we get these flash manufacturing PMIs. I'm focusing mostly on the manufacturing side. Like last week, we looked at the Philly Fed, right? We looked at the Empire State. Okay. This week, we get the Richmond Fed Manufacturing Index. Okay, we get that tomorrow. We also get all these flash manufacturing numbers. So you get flash services, you get flash manufacturing. I'm sticking with the flash manufacturing just to keep it consistent, right? Because you're like, is that service or is that manufacturing? I think in here, let's just keep it with the flash manufacturing side. If anything crazy pops up on the services side, we'll take a look at it. But I think we're really trying to deal with the manufacturing side of the stuff right now. That's why I focus on this manufacturing. So again, we'll look at these readings. We get them out of Germany, out of the UK, out of the US. And then we get the Richmond Fed. So again, a lot of good manufacturing data on the back of last week's data between the Philly Fed and the Empire State Manufacturing Index. Okay, and then Wednesday we get this. Again, Swiss franc, right? Out of Switzerland, that's the CHF. So when you see CHF, that's Switzerland. So again, the three letters on there, like US dollar, that's US based. GBP is Great Britain. The EUR is Euro. CHF is Switzerland. I think that's all that's on there for this week, right? You'll see other things like JPY, Japan, those are the symbols, generic symbols. Everybody again, when you get into the futures or Forex, everybody's using different symbols. But the point is that's the basic symbol. So anyway, we get UBS, which is a big bank. Probably have seen the name, UBS, economic expectations out of Switzerland. We'll watch that. Then we get more U.S. home sales. We get more housing data, U.S. home sales, new home sales, and there's existing home sales. I can't find the data on existing home sales. I thought I saw it come out last week, but I haven't seen it. I can't find it. I can't find it last week. I can't find it this week. I can't find it next week. I don't know if they just haven't posted it or what, but that normally comes before the new home sales, but I don't see the data on it. So we'll have to keep an eye on that. And then maybe I just missed it or something. And then we get the crude oil inventories. We saw that massive, draw last week of minus 9.3 million barrels. We know we've got this projection going into this year, surpluses into 2026 surpluses. Keeping that in mind, but this was kind of a move in the other direction. And Thursday, we get the Swiss National Bank monetary policy statement. We get U.S. final GDP quarter over quarter. We get U.S. durable goods. That kind of fits in this manufacturing a little bit, right? Durable goods. Even though there's a consumer level and a manufacturing level, but again, watching this consumer durable goods and that from that standpoint. And then Friday, we get this core PCE, personal consumption expenditures price index. That's one that the Fed watches closely. I think we went through that when I kind of showed the stuff on the dot plots last week and the PCE number. These are things that the Fed really likes. They really like this PCE index. So again, this is something, of course, they're going to look at the CPI and the PPI and, the jobs data and those kind of things. Because again, they have that dual mandate, maximum employment, price stability. But this is one of those things that they look at. They really like this PCE. So again, this can move markets. And then we get this garbage University of Michigan sentiment reading coming out on Friday, but it does move markets. This is a revised number, but it doesn't matter. I mean, for some reason, this is one of those things I'm talking about, right? You get these news wires and you're like, that's garbage, right? And this one almost always fits in that category that it's garbage. All right. Okay, so Friday, looking back real quickly, we had the UK retail sales beat. Interesting based on what's going on in the UK. And then we get Canada, we had the core retail sales. That was a big miss. Why does that matter? Because again, what's Canada going to do in these negotiations? The weaker that economy gets, the more likely they are to strike better trade deals with the U.S., shut down the fentanyl, shut down the illegal border crossing, shut down all these different things that could potentially still be going on. And more than anything, the flow of goods, right? And getting a good situation, or at least a fair situation for the U.S. with Canada. Okay, that's the ultimate goal. And then, then we had Daly speaking on Friday. I misspelled his name. It's not DAI, it's just DALY. And then, okay, so today we get, this is loaded, right? So we get 9:45, we get the, out of Great Britain, we get member, an MPC, so again, Monetary Policy Committee member, Pill is his last name, speaking. Then we get a swath of FOMC members speaking today, starting at 9:45. Williams, Musalem, Moran, that's at Stephen Moran. We were just talking about that President Trump put on the FOMC board. And then we get Barkin and Hammock. So again, this is what happens on the back of big statements or big policy statements like we saw last week. And what will be the impact? What will be the consensus? What are they all going to say? And we know we're going to get Moran. We kind of know where he's going to fall. Where do the other ones fall? Okay. And we'll probably see more of this over the next coming weeks. We get German Bubba Nagel speaking. So again, that's the same kind of thing out of Germany. Again, these big economic speakers. And then we get the Bank of England Governor Bailey speaking later today at 2 o'clock. So there's really no economic day today, but there's a ton of speakers. And this is very dangerous if you're in markets because it just makes choppiness, right? I mean, you get one speaker. If he comes out and he or she comes out and says something crazy, causes a knee-jerk reaction, someone else comes back 15 minutes later, says something the opposite, and then you can get 2 or 3 knee-jerks before the market says, okay, I've had enough of this, right? No more knee-jerks. And then all of a sudden you get something coming out of Europe, right? And they say something, and it jerks around the currency markets, right? And then all of a sudden that has a trickle effect to the stock market or the bond market. So again, these kind of days when I see this, it's like, be very careful. Big things can happen if it all goes in one direction, but it can be very choppy when we get these kinds of situations. All right. Let's take a quick look at this housing data. Like I said, the existing home sales, I didn't see that come through. I'm going to try to track that down. But so far, we've got 3 reads. NAHB housing, slightly worse than forecasted. Building permits, that's a decent miss, right? Expected at one point. Boy, this one's cutting off too. I got to fix the prior. I got to tighten this thing up. Okay, and then we get the, I didn't see that. Okay, before the housing starts, same thing with building permits and housing starts, almost identical numbers. I think one was actually 1.36 and they revised it up to 1.37 for the forecast. But nonetheless, both of them came in at 1.31 million on the actual side. So again, building permits, housing starts, and those two go hand in hand, right? You get building permits first, then you get housing starts. Okay, then you get, and basically the new home sales, and you get into a bunch of different things there. But continuing to watch his housing, right? I want to watch this closely. Okay, and then I think then we get into our headlines here. So we had the Charlie Kirk Memorial. I think we talked about that one enough. We've got this thing coming out at 4 o'clock today where they're going to talk about Tylenol being connected to autism. And how does this happen? Okay, well, supposedly, right, it's going to be very controversial for sure. And it's going to be shot down. You're going to have a contingency that's going to say this is complete garbage. There's nothing founded in this. Then you're going to have another contingency that's going to say, going to try to make a case. We'll see what the case is that they're going to make for this at 4 o'clock. But here's where it matters is that, everyone has Tylenol in their medicine cabinet pretty much. I would imagine it's a high percentage of people. And then the other thing here that matters is that could this have happened with women who take Tylenol when they're pregnant and then it transfers over to the baby while it's developing? And then this is part of what causes autism. I think that if they're going to make a connection, that's where the connection's probably going to be made, is right in that space. Okay. That's what we're watching for on that. Trump to add $100,000 in fees for H-1B visas. Okay, let's hit this one. So this should be pretty easy, but it's a headline grabber. Okay, $100,000 for an H-1B visa. So essentially, that's what happens. People come over to work in the U.S. They get an H-1B visa. There's all these different kind of visas. Okay, there's for education, for work, for different things. And a lot of the tech space uses this because they get programmers coming over from, they grab these supposed, smart guys out of India and so forth. And that's what we're going to focus on today is just the India part of this. All right. So I think this is part of a negotiation with India, right? We've seen India not playing ball with shutting down the oil out of Russia. Just to refresh, India takes oil from Russia, refine it, and then they sell it on the market. Some of it might go to China refined, some of it may go different places in the Middle East. I don't know where all the destinations that India sells all this stuff, but they take a lot of oil in from Russia. And if you're going to put sanctions on Russia, part of the ways you're going to have to do this is through India, right? You're going to have to shut down the thing that hurts Russia the most, and that's what? Oil, energy. It's where Russia makes a lot of its money. And how it can stay afloat and how they can circumvent the sanctions, right? They can, push the money through different channels. I don't know exactly how they're doing it. There's a lot of suspicion as to how they do it. But nonetheless, it's a way to circumvent the sanction system, right? That's going on in Europe, right? That's going on through the G7, right? All these people that are trying to curtail, this Russia, when really it's Ukraine that's prompting, So again, we've talked about this stuff, right? And I'm sure you're well aware that, like the Ukraine instigated a lot of this war. We instigated a lot of it, with Victoria Nuland. And, this goes way, way back, right? For 2014, 2000, when Yeltsin, handed the baton to Putin. I mean, this thing goes way back, right? This has been building for a long time. But nonetheless, right, this targets India the most, right? This H-1B visa thing. And all signs indicate that this is part of a negotiation with India for tariffs, oil, resistance, to resistance to what the U.S. wants, resistance to renegotiating trade deals, right? Remember, India was the first one at the table trying to strike a trade deal with President Trump, thinking it was going to be a slam dunk. I think they thought if they came in quick, they could maybe get a deal done, right? The Trump administration would be desperate and they could kind of slip through the cracks. Well, that didn't happen. And now they're actually at the bottom of the line, right? They went from the top to the bottom. And now India is kind of struggling and they're getting 50% tariff slapped on them for this oil. They're not in a great situation. And now this is just more pressure on them. Okay. And so, again, like the tariffs, this will capture the air in the room. And it's capturing the headlines today, right? You're going to see this all throughout the day. If you're watching the TV, the news, it's going to be and again, everyone will have their spin on it, but I really think it's all around negotiations. And the other thing that comes out of this is that, I think that this administration really wants to keep foreign students and workers that they train in the U.S. Okay. Don't let it get called the brain drain, right? You can have state level brain drain. You can have national level brain drain. So you don't want to have all these people come into our universities, teach them everything, and then they just go off to, someplace else, take the knowledge. And not only that, make the connections. And then maybe that's how a lot of these, trade secrets slip out, is through this whole process. So again, and the other thing that's going on here, though, is that this will likely give a temporary burst in U.S. demand for skilled IT and programmers, okay, if this thing actually gets followed through on, because you're basically putting a bubble between, the foreign tech people and you're putting between U.S. tech people, you're putting $100,000 gap in there. So there's a lot. So this could actually increase the pay for the programmers and the tech people temporarily, okay, that are in this space, that are U.S. based, U.S. citizens. So it can actually drive their wages higher, which is a good thing short term. The problem is that we know that this AI, right, and the ability to code through AI is changing the whole way things are done. So, might be a short term. Two things. One, if it actually gets followed through on, okay, and they follow through on these $100,000 cost for these H-1B visas, it should allow U.S. tech workers to flourish short term, but then we know there's the back pressure of the AI coming and the ability for AI to write code effectively if you know how to do it and you know how to run the right command prompts and you know how to piece everything together. It's going to, longer term, we're probably going to see pressure on these coders. All right. Okay, so let's take a look at this. We have we had the question in here from Zero Woke where we had the crypto pulls back. Let's take a look at the charts here. Let me go in here and let's get this. Take a look at this. There's a couple things I want to show you on this 50. Let me go. Okay, so here's Bitcoin. Here's a longer term on it. Okay, so longer term we've got, this is Bitcoin monthly. Okay, this is the futures markets. I mostly look at this from the futures perspective. It's probably not the best way because, again, the futures markets close down at Friday. They open up Sunday night. So there's 2 days where the futures markets aren't trading, but Bitcoin's actually trading. So you get a lot of gaps in here, right? So, but that being said, I watch it because here's why. Because it's easier for me to get the data into places where I can use it to look at it. And so it's a lot. I'll just leave it at that. It's easier from a data perspective for me. So that's why I watch this. This isn't the best source, right? Is the futures market. It's okay, right? It captures the high volume periods throughout the week. Sunday night to Friday night, but the stuff that goes on Saturday and Sunday, crypto can adjust. It can move. A lot of times, I'd say 80% of the moves that go from Friday till Sunday night are scams. 20% of them, if something happens, crypto can adjust because it's 24/7. So it can adjust quicker, or it can adjust at the moment before these futures markets and everything open up on Sunday night. So it's a nice thing to have, access to if you're really trading globally and around the world. But anyway, here's the Bitcoin monthly. Okay, obviously, this goes back to 2016, and you can see, this was when it took a dip back in here into the 30. Let me just mark this into the sub 4,000 range. Okay, and this is a spot where I was trying to tell people, I wasn't doing a show then, but I was trying to say to people like, look, if you like Bitcoin, and because remember it had a big run up to 20,000, kind of hesitated there, sold off. Here it was like sub 4,000. I was saying, look, if you think this thing's going to stick around for a little while, this is not a bad spot, because you're buying it for 20% the price that it was at. Okay, and then, so now you've seen a couple big pushes, but this thing's a wild ride. After that 4,000, you get a push up into 60,000. You get a sell-off back down to 33, back up to 60. And then a pullback all the way down to 15, right around in here. And then you get this big move from 15 up to we hit 120, almost 125, I think. I think we hit 125 in Bitcoin over the last couple weeks. So that's the bigger picture, right? That's kind of the wild ride over the last 8 to 9 years in Bitcoin. All right, so then let's take a look at this. All right, so this is recently, okay? Again, we had this white dashed line. Again, not a harmonic structure, but it was a big psychological level, 100,000. So remember, we talked about that going to the end of last year, beginning of this year, where Bitcoin looked like it was going to make a run. It was sitting around 80-some thousand. We said, really good chance that this thing wants to go up and find 100,000. It's just, right? I mean, this is that kind of market that's just hungry for big psychological levels. So 100,000 was a big psychological level. I would say even 125,000 is a significant psychological level. So once it cleared 100,000 and it found support above 100,000, it took a while to do that, right? It went up, tested it a couple times, got above it, came back down and tested it, spent quite a bit of time around 100,000. Then it made this big push, and that's what you're seeing here, right? Again, this is on the September contract, so I need to roll this over to December because this is actually cooked now, right? This isn't even active. We'll switch that over here in a second. But the point is, you see that big run up from that white dash line, okay, when this futures market was thin, all the way up to that 125, and now you see a sideways pattern. And what I'm trying to point out here is where this purple little shaded area is at. I think we're sitting at like 114. It's kind of that level. I'll get to that here in a second, but let me switch this over just so we have the current, see if this changes anything, BT. See if that'll switch it. Okay, so let that fill in. But let's take a look at this. Well, that's a mess. I don't know what's going on there. I'll have to come back and take a look at that later. Let me see if I can add some value here, though, on why are all these things? I'm not sure why we're getting. All right. Well, this is a mess from a long time ago. I think this was, we can work off of this, though, I think. Yeah, I think I can show what I wanted. All right. I apologize. I thought I had these all lined up for the Bitcoin. But there's not much to take away from this, okay? Here's the big thing. Back in here, back in this zone. Let me mark this off with a... Okay, so we had this area here. This was a consolidation period. Okay, market went up. We were talking about this. These spots down in here were decent buys. Okay, because where those little purple, I don't know, things sticking off the bottom of that box are. Okay, because again, we had this consolidative trend channel, right? Market pushed up. We were able to strike this trend channel, thinking there's a good chance this thing can consolidate either sideways to slightly down for a little while. And I think in here we were saying, like, what was this? This was like July of, so this would have been right when the show first started in 2024. But here we were in late August, and I know this one right here in particular, right? I'll just draw a big vertical across this. This one in particular, we're saying that's a pretty good spot right in there to be looking at this Bitcoin. Okay, and sure enough, it works. You can also see another thing in here. Let me show you this, right? We had a big energy build. Right, and I'm going to put this in blue. Okay, well, right below that blue, that's terrible. This is really a mess. Let me get rid of that. But you can see where that dark blue is at. There's red goes inside the white. So we had a pretty significant energy build during this consolidative phase, right? So again, Bitcoin makes this big push up, okay, up into the 70s. And we were able to draw this consolidative trend channel slightly downward, okay? And then as it's happening, right, from this period to this period, right, as we're able to start drawing this consolidative trend channel, guess what happens? The energy builds, right? The red goes inside the white. Basically, the market taking a deep breath in, ready to take a deep breath out. And sure enough, you get a resolution to the upside. Okay. And there was a decent chance it was going to do that because the momentum was strong enough, right? So when we get these, so here's the best of all worlds, right? Here's a little secret. When we get strong momentum, okay, and we get these energy builds, it's pretty clear that this market's going to blow to the upside, right? And those can be very explosive moves. Those are good for option trades, right? So if you want to buy call options, okay, or if you want to buy put options, if this is setting up on the downside, if you can find these situations where you have strong momentum, okay, and you can use different things, you can use, there's a lot of different momentum technical indicators out there. And I don't want to really say like use this one or that one or whatever, because I use them in different ways, and it's not a generic thing. It's really one you have to study. So like stochastics is a good one, right? Stochastics is good at finding momentum, okay, and you can use different time frames. You can play around with it till you feel comfortable, okay. And I'll do some of this in some of these sessions, right? When we do this educational stuff, and we got to get on it because we're in the fourth quarter now, or we're approaching it, right? And I said, I'd start working on these things, so I'm gonna have to start doing those in the community here. I'm just trying to get my footing with Aaron Day and this round table and that kind of stuff, and technical issues, making sure we actually have sound and things like that, those little things. But once I get back on and I start doing this, like this is one of the things I want to cover, you know what I mean, is like, okay, what could you do with momentum, right? Like what are a couple different ways you can look at it? But the key is if you can get momentum, okay, and you can measure how strong the momentum is, right? And I call it torque. So you'll hear me refer to it as torque 1, torque 2, and then momentum, just plain generic momentum. And when you get that and you get an energy build, the odds of it resolving in the direction of the momentum is quite high, okay? And it can be a very explosive move. So essentially you can protect yourself with options because you have limited downside, but you have explosive upside, right? And guess what? The volatility comes in, so that option gets cheaper and cheaper and cheaper over time. So as that energy is building, the longer you can wait. So if you could wait till this big, let me just mark this again. This is, I'll just mark it all the way up and down. This guy, let me just, that purple, right? The tall vertical purple space. If you can wait until that point, right? If you can be patient, wait till that point, and you can buy your call option down in there, you're going to get that call option cheaper, right? Because the volatilities come in, right? Because this move right here created a lot of volatility, okay? Now, again, this may not apply to, you're going to have to, Bitcoin does have futures on it, or options on the futures, and there's ways to play this. Not maybe the easiest market to do it on, but still doable, right? But the key is, if you can wait and if you can be patient and if you can let the momentum build and the energy build, and you can find a low risk spot like down in this area, like this, okay, down in there, that's a spot to buy an option. It's proven it can go up. It's getting cheaper, okay, and you're positioned for an explosive move up. Okay, so that's all history. Big deal, right? Big deal. Okay, we get this big push up to what, 100,000 then, okay? And that would have been a great trade, but history is history. Now what are we looking at? Well, you can see this on the daily. We're sitting against this bright green line, okay? And that's a moving average, right? Markets tend to come back to moving averages. And after they've had big moves, they'll a lot of times spend time around a moving average, right? Trying to figure out what they're going to do next, especially on a daily or a weekly time frame. So if we look at this on a weekly, okay, and you can see this market's been pretty strong, right? And you can see there's a moving average down in here. Okay, that again, same thing, a green line. Could Bitcoin pull back into the 70,000? Well, there's a lot of analysts out there. I have good friends who've done Bitcoin for a long time, and they follow some really good analysts. This guy's name's Marius. He's out of Australia. He's got this supposed algorithm that these guys just love and they, fawn over all the time. I'm not as big of a fan of it, but this guy's calling for 70,000 back in Bitcoin. So the point is, can we see a pullback in Bitcoin back to 70,000? I think we could, and here's the deal. Let's see if I can find that. Anyway, we'll just do it on here. Forget it. We'll just do it on here. Okay. So here's why, right? If you can look at these two highs back in here, there's a lot of volume taking place in this area. Okay. Prior highs back in here. Okay. Right there and there. And then you get fair amount of volume that took place through there. This was that consolidative period, okay, that we just went through, okay? This was that, again, it doesn't look like much on this daily chart or on this weekly chart, but it looked like a lot on that other chart, right? That's what it means when we dig into we dig in and we put a microscope on it, we get detail. This is a mess looking at this, right? But on that other chart, it was pretty clear, right? You had that nice consolidative trend channel. You knew where to take your chance on the lower end of that trend channel. And you knew that the momentum was high, and you knew that the energy was building. So if you can get a call option on there, right, you get that push. Okay, so that being said, that's that. Now, can this Bitcoin come back into this place, right? Can it come back to this moving average, number one? And can it actually come back and test this purple shaded area? And that's what a lot of these guys are calling for, right? Is a retest of 70,000, which would basically be the top of this purple shaded zone, okay? I don't know. I mean, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go into this shorter area here, right? And I'm going to watch what happens. You can see here, something's not right with all this data here. I got to clean this up, but I'm going to let it be at that. Let me flip over. I don't want to go on and on and on. We'll come back and look at this. All right, let's watch what happened. That 114 going down into the 112 area this morning, overnight, to me seems significant. We broke this 114. Okay, that was that support that we've talked about. I'm going to clean these charts up. We'll come back and look at this again tomorrow, right? Make it clear. And, hopefully Bitcoin doesn't go to 110 today or something like that and slips away from us. But the point is, if you have some, it might be a chance to think about taking some profits, getting out. If you took some at 120, fantastic. If you took some at 125, even better, right? If you took some at 116, great. If you haven't, and you want to, this isn't a bad spot to be potentially taking some profits, right? You're still sitting at 112 or 113, depending upon where you got in, of course, but it depends on tons of things. Here's what I'm also seeing, though, on Ethereum, all right? Look at this expansion in volatility on Ethereum, okay? So I drew this way back into here, found a couple points, right, to come off of. But you can see this thing we talk about these consolidating triangles. This is actually the opposite, this expansion in volatility, right? So over the recent period of time since, what is this, February of 2024, right around in here. Okay, so this is a daily chart on Ethereum. And here we see, this big move up. Okay, and then we see this thing consolidate sideways, but it's consolidating sideways in an expansionary situation. So this is giving us signs that something big could be coming, right? Some kind of a expanding in volatility, and it's very confusing. Why is it confusing? Because technically it takes out prior highs, and then on the downside, it takes out prior lows, okay? So it really confuses, the longer term traders who just go off basic stuff. If you don't have the harmonic structures, if you can't manage the risk, if you can't drill down into smaller detail and tear it apart, get a big perspective, then tear it apart. I just want to point this out, right? Because on this daily time frame, it's pretty clear you can see this expansion and volatility, and that confuses markets. Markets get confused. It sets up the potential for big moves. So again, Bitcoin potentially pulling back into that 70,000 range, okay, which is a big move. You're talking $40,000, right? The same thing with this Ethereum. It's giving us indications that these markets could fall apart. I think Bitcoin's a sham. I think it's been hijacked. I think it was a good idea out of the gate, but I think they've turned it in. They took it from the transactable currency to what they call now digital gold, and it's really not even good as digital gold because it really doesn't have the privacy that they originally indicated. So again, I think Bitcoin is a scam personally. It doesn't mean you can't trade it. Doesn't mean I don't trade it, right? It just means that be careful with it. And that if it hits 70,000, we want to see what it does there. Okay. Can it hold that level? Bitcoin goes through these, you can see that's why I showed that monthly chart, right? It goes through these, big surging events, it's definitely a psychological thing. And does it really give us the safety and security that they pretend that it does? I don't think so, right? And it surely doesn't give you privacy because these are things we'll cover with Aaron Day. I could go on with that for an hour. All right, let's keep moving here. Let's take a look at I want to go through a couple currencies here real fast today just to let's go through a few of these. We still have a few things we want to hit topic-wise too. Okay, so here's the dollar. Let me expand this out. Again, this is what we're looking at longer term, right? Converging triangle. Dollar's holding above the apex, right, where those two purple lines come together. It's holding above there. That level's at like 95. Dollar's trading right around 97 right now. And let's drill down just a little bit on this because last week we saw, let me see if I can get to it from here. Let's just do this one. There we go. Okay, so here's the dollar. And we got this nice potential double bottom last week at basically $96, right, where those two yellow circles are at. Now, what does this mean? You can see there's an energy build coming in, right? The red's going inside the white. Is this thing going to resolve itself to the downside? There is momentum to this is it's exactly the opposite of what I just said, with the Bitcoin. When you have momentum and you have an energy build, the odds of it resolving in the direction of the momentum is quite high. In this particular case, on the daily time frame, that's what it would say with the dollar, that the dollar is going to blow out to the downside, okay? And it's going to break this 96, 95 level. So I'm going to go back on my rules here and say, usually that's what happens, okay? And that might be what happens here, right? The odds are against us to be buying this dollar, right? But again, we have the longer term picture. We have the apex. We have this, this converging triangle, that we're looking at. And we're defying the odds, okay, in this particular case. If we defy the odds, though, there's a lot of people that are short this dollar, okay? There's a lot of people that are long this euro, right? And here's the euro. Let's take a look at that because we have this on the flip side. See if I can find the opposite on this one too. Okay, here's the euro. So here's that double top we've been talking about. Right? Same thing in the euro. It's the inverse, right? Dollar double bottom, and euro double top potential. Okay, so not massive energy build here. Let's look at the weekly. We've got this downward sloping trend channel. The euro is broken above it. That makes things messy. Okay, this downward sloping trend channel has been in place for quite some time. You can see these marks back in here, these purple tops, where those squares are at. You can see kind of a retest in here a little bit too, and a retest through this area. Okay, and then this retest, then another retest through here. Okay, so this euro is a really hard thing to decipher. And I think this is because it's been manipulated, right? I mean, let's just get to the bare. I've watched this thing for 25 years and traded it for 25 years. Longer than that, actually. I've traded it. Well, I traded the D-Mark and the French franc and all those things long before the euro came along. But the point is, I think this thing's a fraud. This whole euro is a fraud, okay? And I know those are big words. Could you just throw a blanket over it that it's a complete fraud? But I've just watched it get manipulated by the European Central Bank. And I've watched everybody around the world manipulate this euro because, again, it's propaganda. It's mind control. If you can tell everybody the euro is going higher, then what does that mean? By default, the dollar is going lower. Dollar goes lower, that means inflation. What do the globalists want? They want inflation. Dollar goes higher, we get deflation. What do we want? We want deflation, right? We got to get this inflation thing back in check. So that's the question. Can the dollar go higher? We're defying the odds here, but if it starts to show itself on the upside, this thing could really, really run. And that gets us into the Swiss franc. And I don't know if I have that chart ready to go. I want to come back and do that because the data that I use, the Forex data that I use, historical Forex data, they went away. They only went to institutions. I can't use them anymore. So they gave me another one, which isn't quite as good, but it's not that bad. So I got to redraw on my chart. So anyway, I need to take the time to do that. But I want to get into this Swiss franc again and show you this downtrend from basically, here's the takeaway. From 1970s, when the Forex markets basically have historical data, down till now, it's been the Swiss franc, the dollar's been down against the Swiss franc. There's a huge energy build down at the bottom, right? We're looking for technical things in there that we can manage the risk against. We could be at one here at like 126 in the Swiss franc. And that's what we're looking for. Same thing with the British pound. Last week, we saw the British pound get up to like 136, I think it was, to the dollar. It's way overvalued, right? This makes no sense. It's not even logical. And we might be able to look at that. Let me see if I actually have something ready to go on that. This might work. So here's the British pound. So here it is. It got to actually higher than that, 137.31. I bet I have some stuff here ready to go. Okay, let's look at this. Okay, this will work. So this is a monthly on the British pound. This is looking at the futures, not the Forex. Like I said, when I rebuild all those, we'll come back and look at them. But here's the British pound, right? We talk about this, the UK, all the time, okay? Here's the currency. We got an energy build, okay? We probably have momentum. We've got a nice entry point coming here soon. This thing looks to me like it could resolve on the downside. That's why I have that turquoise shaded area down there. That's basically parity to the dollar, 1-to-1. Right, so now it's sitting at 137, 130. It's a little bit under 136. It spiked up to 137. I think it come down to 1. So there's a lot of these markets: the Australian dollar, the Canadian dollar, the Japanese yen, the British pound, the Swiss franc. Right, all these markets are set up to move. And when they move, unless they just go completely different directions and the whole system fractures, you can't rule that out. But again, that's not the high odds thing. The high odds thing is that these currencies are going to all head to the downside, right, relative to the dollar, right? That's the bigger picture. The question is right now, the dollar doesn't look good, right? We're defying the odds with momentum. And we don't necessarily want to do that. So right now is a time to still be patient, right? We've been talking about this. I've been talking about this I probably since, July of last year. So again, another year has passed, and here we just talk about this trade. You know what I mean? The Swiss franc's going to do this and the euro is going to do that. And these are big moves that, like I said, the Swiss franc could be one contract in the futures market, $2,500 to trade it. It could be a $75,000 to $100,000 trade. So you're talking about potentially 30 to 40 to 1 risk reward ratio. And when things like that happen, sometimes the component in there that drives you nuts is the time, right? You got to just pay your dues with time. And then when it starts to happen, you have to realize, okay, we're in go mode now, right? You get so lulled to sleep that you're not really willing to trade it that much. You're like, oh, this euro just never does anything. It just, it just continues to drift higher. But then once something triggers, you have to say, okay, now it's time to get very, very active on these things. And the same thing happens with stocks, right? Whether it's Apple stock or Nvidia stock, or you get in these modes where these stocks just get on a rampage. And when they do that, theoretically, you probably should be more active in there. There's going to, momentum, how do I put this? Momentum is a very tricky thing to trade, but it's a very good thing to trade. And you have to these are the things we'll cover in the courses. But the key is you will get pullbacks in momentum, because that's what I'm waiting for in gold, right? Is this pullback in gold, because you have a lot of momentum there, right? Like right now, I can tell you on the weekly, you're at 98 on a momentum read, right? You're at 98 on a daily read. You're high on the monthly read, right? On the 55, on the 1 hour, you're sitting at 93 for momentum read. So, I mean, this is telling you there's momentum so thick and so strong in this gold. At some point, you're going to get a sharp pullback, and it's just going to, decimate, right, this momentum temporarily, and then it becomes an entry, right? That's why I'm so concerned with this. That's why I like the silver better. Oh, let's take a look at that. Let's jump over. I want to make sure we get to those. And then we got to cover a few more little things here today. All right. So here's the silver, right? We had this back in here. We had this, this was our target. Let me see if I have that stuff on this chart. Jeez. So we had this 37.93 target, and I don't know where I showed that. All right. Anyway, it could be here. Let me just go through a couple of these. Here it is. Okay. So this is that harmonic structure we're working on, the white dashed line. Okay. 37.93 was our target all the way through here. Again, we've rolled contracts, but again, it hit this 37.93, came off, came back up, hit the 37.93. Then it blew through, okay? And now we said, longer term, we were looking at this from a longer term perspective, okay? We're looking at these. Why are we looking at that? Prior high, okay? It's that simple, right? Prior high, that's where that yellow line comes, okay? And we said that this thing's from 43 to 45 range, probably somewhere around in there. And that's right where silver's sitting, okay? It's sitting at 43.36, I think. It's probably a little higher than that, 43.80. Okay, so 43.82, $43.82 an ounce. Again, gold-silver ratio was so out of whack, something had to give, okay? It looks like silver's making ground on gold now, right? Gold's still cranking, okay? But at some point, could gold even see a sell-off and bring this ratio into 60 or 70 to 1, right? And silver maybe pulls back, but it doesn't pull back as hard. So this is the goal, right? I mean, if you were still, longer the silver, over the last month or so, you probably are doing better than you would if you were, trading gold to the upside or investing on gold to the upside, right? Silver's been a nice trade. And, back in the days of Market Ultra back in here, we had a full downside objective back in here. I think it was right here at $22.14 an ounce, right? I'll just draw a line across there. So where that little purple line's going across, we had a downside target. You can find it. I think it was in early 2024, I think it was. We saw a full downside target to 22.14. That's when I was saying this is a low risk spot to trade silver. Now we're going to be looking for the opposite on this. Is silver getting overvalued? Where is it? We need to monitor this. This is where it gets tricky. You get a runaway freight trade on silver and gold, but silver has been outperforming of late over the gold market. Okay. And there was something else I wanted to cover here. I think we'll skip that. The 10-year note, we'll cover that tomorrow. Tomorrow's debt day. Again, this thing's kind of just, this is just a mess, right? It just keeps hanging in there. It hasn't given anything up, but it's not making any progress. Big energy build. Something's going to come along that's going to push this market up or down, okay? And again, the white dashed line at 111.10, right? That's kind of going across the middle, slightly below the middle of the screen, that white dashed line, that's our real line in the sand. It starts to crack that. I mean, look out, right? We're going to probably go into higher rates, and we've got a sovereign debt crisis going on somewhere around the world. Up until then, we're looking at this 10-year note to make progress up to potentially 121, 122 in the 10-year note, which means probably that 3%, maybe slightly, could be 2.75% to 3.25% on the 10-year, on the yield, right? For the 10-year yield. All right, let me take a look in here at some of these questions. All right, it's convenient to have okay, Rachel Hawk. Good morning, Rachel. Trumpet, did Tylenol or someone who worked for them know about the autism thing in 1982? Boy, that's a great question, Trumpet. Was that an early warning or just, boy, I don't know. That's a great question. I don't know. That's a great question. We're going to find out, Love this crypto pullback, making way for a nice rally into Q4. Yep, it's possible, Geo Rich. Again, watch that potential, I'll come back and look at this chart. We need to start looking at these technical levels and seeing like, okay, if it breaks this, get concerned. If it breaks this, get concerned. Because what you don't want to do is get caught sitting there saying, oh, it's at 90. I'm hanging on. It's at 80. And then you get a pullback to 70 without taking some off the table, right? Even if you hold some, again, I'm hearing a lot of people talking about this pullback to 70. I'm not a huge fan of some of these analysts, but I am taking it into consideration because it broke that 114. I thought that 114 level was significant. It broke it. It's at 112. What's it going to do? Is it going to stay below it? So that's the key for me. And I'm going to come back and we'll look at these technical levels. If not, remind me. We'll keep looking at this Bitcoin because I have interest in this too for multiple reasons. Okay, it needs to go down a little bit more. Did he give him a time frame? 70,000? No, but I'll ask my buddy. That's a good question. I'll ask him for the time frame on that. What those analysts are saying. I'm hearing a downtrend toward the second half of 2026. Do you ever look at liquidation charts for Bitcoin? I don't. If you could explain that to me a little more, Geo Rich, I don't look at liquidation charts. I don't even know what that means. Maybe I should. That's what makes Forex tricky, I think, due to government intervention. True. There is truth to that, right? That there is government intervention. And the volatility in the Forex has been pretty low. That's why I think we're going to see some blow-ups, okay? Are the markets bigger than the governments or the governments bigger than the markets? And again, the markets are really we the people. And if we the people realize what's going on, and that's why it's so important to do this technocracy work, right? And why it's so important to give people alternatives, right? That challenge the government, you know what I mean? That challenge things, that challenge the narrative, challenge the flows, challenge just challenge. I'll just leave it at that, right? I mean, that's why, check these out. Check out the tech. We're going to cover sovereign wealth funds and I think robotics or something on Wednesday. I'm going to really try to focus on the sovereign wealth fund stuff just because we've talked about that in here and I really, that's going to be my thing. So again, check out these technocracy. It's easy to find. Courtney Turner, Patrick Wood, Aaron Day. You can look me up. Technocracy Roundtable. I think you can go to CourtneyTurner.com, Courtney Turner Substack. You'll find it there. Aaron Day, he's not as good at promoting things as Courtney. Courtney's much better at promoting things. And Patrick Wood, his site's good too. Technocracy News, good stuff for that stuff. I just think this stuff's incredibly important. But if you can, give me that liquidation stuff on that. That'd be great. I'll look into that. We can comment about that. Okay. Here's something else. Let's go back and take a look at this. I want to dive into this quickly. I don't want to run too long here, but let's hit this. Okay. Buffett ramps up Mitsui stake. Okay. So if you've been listening, Buffett came out at the Berkshire Hathaway conference. He does this annual conference and he said, we're making investments in Japan that we're never going to let go of, right? Never is a crazy word, especially for someone like Buffett to use when he's like 94 or 5 years old or something like that. Here's the thing. I keep watching this, right? And so I watch what a movie he's just making. Okay. He lifts his stake in Mitsui. Okay. So this is a bet on Japan's trading houses. Okay. Banking and trading. Okay. And so Buffett has recently upped his stake in the Japanese trading house Mitsui, surpassing his 10% ownership threshold in voting rights. Okay. This move follows an increase in other Japanese trading companies, and it's signaling that Buffett has continued confidence in the diversified nature of these. And I don't know what this means. I meant to look this up before the show, but it's Sogo Shosha. I don't know what that means. But anyway, I need to look this up. I'm sure it's a Japanese term. I mean, obviously that, but I need to look. I don't know what that means. Okay, but it was just the headline. All right. So here's the strategy of investing in Japan's 5 largest trading firms. He started this in 2019 with a small stake, and he continues to build this. All right. So he's betting on a lot of trade flow in Japan. Okay. It could indicate a sovereign debt crisis and how he believes it will unfold. Okay. So again, when we think of sovereign debt crisis, don't think of it as just, you're going along and you fall off a cliff. But what it does is it leads to things like, the carry trade blowing up like it did last August. It leads to, selling off these ETFs like they're doing. Okay. It leads to higher interest rates, right? Which Japan is doing. Okay. And they're trying to probably stay out front of this before it gets out front of them. So what does this mean, a sovereign debt crisis? With this much derivatives, like we've never been through anything like this. So it's hard to know. And it's hard to know how much these guys can cover up and for how long they can cover it up. Does Japan start the sovereign debt crisis, but they're able to cover it up? And then it trickles over to some other place, Australia or New Zealand or Europe or something like that. I don't know. This is what we're watching for, okay? But here's the thing. Berkshire planned to spread out this investment and not exceed the 10% level, okay? So this indicates to us that he's loading up, right? His intention was not to go above this 10% level because it creates all kinds of issues for them, right? They become, it changes them from becoming a moderate investor to a bigger investor, right? And all these forms get triggered and so forth. But this is an indication that he's loading up on this stuff and that there's a theme underway here, right? Because he started this in 2019, it's almost 2026, and he continues to up the stake. So this could be what they're talking about. Story's still to be told, right? Story's still unfolding. All right. Jumping over to this one, we've got, this thing continues to roll and it's just not a good thing. All right. Oracle, we talked about this last week, Oracle securing the TikTok algorithm, okay? TikTok, deal got done or is getting done, supposedly, right? ByteDance held all of it, Chinese-based. They're going to hold 20%. We don't know the percentages, but we know that Oracle, Andreessen Horowitz, and Silver Lake were in on this deal to take the other 80%. I'm assuming Oracle has the biggest stake in that. Oracle will now have control of the TikTok algorithm, okay? Not only that, President Trump is allowing the Murdoch family to come into this whole thing. So again, the people who control the algorithm in these days, right, are the ones who control how people get their news. Okay, so let me say that again. The people who control the algorithm control how people get their news. Okay, so this is majorly concerning. So you bring Murdochs in, what does it mean? Spreading the news. You bring this back to Charlie Kirk, right? The right, the conservative movement, okay? Are they using us? That's the question. Are they, again, they've got our attention, okay? They've got this, this algorithm. Okay. Is this stuff connected? That's the question. Is it connected in terms of they're trying to control, right, the algorithm, and they're trying to control how we get our news. Okay. So again, Charlie Kirk, Oracle, Rupert Murdoch, Fox, the conservative movement, all these things. Okay. You probably can connect some of those dots in there. I don't know exactly what's going on here, but boy, it sure doesn't feel good. What else did I want to add to this? I had a couple notes on this. This is important too. So China needs to comply, okay, with Chinese laws and regulations. And so when ByteDance drops to 20% or less of a stake in this TikTok, okay, does that violate these laws and regulations? Again, I don't know Chinese law that much, but I know that this is probably infringing upon that level. Okay. So if it is, or if it does, then the question is, what is China up to, and are they getting something in return for this? Okay, something that's important to them. We don't know. This is story to still be told. Is it these Blackwell chips? Is it these H20 chips? Is there something even more nefarious going on that China's going to get access to? I don't know, but I'm just saying, like, something's not right here. Okay, and I want to continue to watch the story, and it might take, like, this might be one of those ones that hits. And then 3 months goes by and there's almost no news on it. And then all of a sudden it's like little trickling of things, like trickle, little stuff comes out, and you have to have a memory, right? You got to remember the story. And that's what's great with what Aaron's doing. I don't want to be responsible for remembering this all on my own. I don't know if anybody else, the other people are covering this. I just don't know if they're tearing into it like we are, trying to connect these things. I don't see anybody doing that. Maybe people are doing it. But that's why I want to team up with Aaron, because these are the kind of things I want to put on a list, right? That we just keep circulating back through as we get more information, right? And you're not alone when you're doing this stuff, right? You've got other smart minds helping you with this stuff. And again, if you guys see stuff, that's great, right? Again, we're all in this together. So we want to watch this stuff. All right. And I think that wraps it up. Is there anything else? I think we hit that. We hit that. Okay, good. I think we hit everything. There's this is such a, I'm just going to give this headline. So Pfizer is going to spend 7.3 billion on a company called Metsera, right? This is them making their foray, coming back into this obesity drug. This obesity drug to me feels like it's going to be a disaster for the future again. It's if you look at the molecules that are used in this, it's a paralyzer, right? They use the venom molecules from a Gila monster, right? That basically it paralyze the venom in it paralyzes tissue and muscles and things like that. So basically, you're taking this molecule, let's just leave it at a molecule. You're taking this and you're synthetically creating it, and then you're putting it into people so that it's basically slows down their digestive system, I think, right? Like, what are I'm just going to leave it at that. Like, I'm not a fan of these obesity drugs. I've seen people take them who, were slightly overweight, and then I see them like 2 months later and they're like, they look drawn out. I mean, it just looks like it's draining them, and, so that's the short-term implication. What's the long-term? I don't know, right? But this just feels to me like here we are trying to solve the Tylenol thing from, like Trumpette said from 1982 or 1972? What was she saying? I lost it. 1982, right? so we're 40 some years into this, and now we just continue to introduce these new drugs on the front end before we ever even figure out if Tylenol caused autism on the back end. So it's just frustrating to me to watch this stuff. Let's hope that RFK Jr. is the right guy in there doing the right thing. He makes a lot of the right moves, but this is an important thing. The health of this country is super important. So we don't cover that enough in here. We don't cover the healthcare stuff enough, but anyway, can't cover it all. Do our best. With that, everyone, have a blessed day. If you can, check out the stuff tonight with Aaron, and we'll be back tomorrow to cover debt. And we'll cover this. We'll come back in and look at this Bitcoin. We need to keep an eye on that, and a lot of stuff. A lot.